When it comes to climate change, we tend to focus most of our attention on the atmosphere and what's going on in the atmosphere, perhaps with good cause, because we see all of the carbon and other sorts of chemicals being emitted in the atmosphere. But it turns out that we should be paying a little bit more attention to the ocean and how the ocean has been changing over time, and in particular, how it has helped to slow some of the effects of climate change up until this point, but perhaps not for much longer. It turns out that since 1970, global waters have been a powerful ally against global warming, absorbing 93% of the carbon dioxide released by human activities. This is according to a report released by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Now, they say that if the oceans weren't there to protect us and hadn't absorbed that massive amount of carbon, our lower atmosphere would have already heated up by 36 degrees Celsius. Which, by the way, does not mean that our temperatures on the surface would be 36 degrees Celsius higher. That's not actually how it works. But it would have been an incredible amount of additional warming going on in the atmosphere that was thankfully averted. Now, the ocean, which has been warming, will continue to warm by between 1 to 4 degrees Celsius by 2100, which is not a long way off, and that is an absolutely massive amount of additional warming, which is going to have a number of effects on both the animals that live there and the rest of the world. We're going to go through some of the effects of that in just a second, but what do you think about this, Ben?
Well, I mean, I always think it's funny that it's like that it would have warmed it if not for the oceans. But I got it. But I mean, and we'd all be incinerated if not for the ozone layer. You know, I mean, like, yeah, the oceans have always been there. Like,
yeah, but we didn't know how strong of an effect they were having absorbing carbon.
Okay.
An effect that will not perhaps continue because in the report they talk about the fact that there is a maximum amount of carbon that it can absorb, and it is reaching.
Yeah, I just think the phrasing is odd in this when I read it.
If not for the moon.
Right. I mean, like, yeah. I mean, if the sun, if it just extinguishes, we're all going to freeze to death very quickly.
Show me your report.
Yeah. So, but yes, it just seems another step that we've maxed out the protection that the oceans can give us against global warming, and so the indication to me would be that, you know, the next 100 years will obviously be much worse than the last 100 years, but, like, you know, the next 15 years will be worse than the last 15 years.
Certainly the next 50, yeah. Yeah, which means that we either need to change how we consume and produce energy, clean the atmosphere, or generate another ocean. Yeah, only 70% of the planet. Let's find some more water, okay, and then we can absorb some more.
It's too bad that like, we didn't get lucky. that
Speak for yourself.
The climate change, it's not luck, John. The climate change didn't make things better. You know, like,
well, but in some ways it has, like for limited circumstances, maybe.
Right, but it didn't like think, oh my God, this is great. Like the result of climate change would be like, food just grows quicker and healthier and better.
God. Yeah, so clean when it's warm.
Yeah,
oh, I hated cold air.
But it did.
Yeah, that is too bad.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it's just more evidence, just makes it hard. The good thing is a story like this, again, comes out after Labor Day, so we have a significant climate change story which might resonate with people, and therefore increases the possibility that we're at least going to talk about it in the coming days. Although for all, you know, our talk to action ratio on climate change is not great in this country or this world. But
our importance to talk ratio isn't good. Our talk to action ratio even worse.
Yeah. So hopefully that, you know, and if Hillary Clinton is elected, she'll, you know, step to the plate in a meaningful way on climate change. But of course we all know we can't do it alone. We are one mighty country, but we are but one country.
And that's one of the reasons why Obama has done, which has fallen short in a number of ways, is still important because he hasn't just improved like the CAF standards and stuff like that here and regulated methane a little bit more, but he's also gotten us involved in some of the international agreements that are the only chance we have to actually stop this. Agreements which Donald Trump says we will leave on day one.
Yeah, again, we've hit on in this first hour, in the first 35 minutes here, two critical issues: voting rights for minorities, climate change. Just two reasons why a vote for Jill Stein is a terrible, terrible mistake. It may be on some higher principle a noble one, but a vote for her is a terrible, terrible practical mistake.
At the very least, in states where that vote could theoretically be the difference.
Sure, I guess.
There are plenty of places where it's not the difference.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that we're at a point where, I mean, to me, it's not just the vote; it's advocating. Like you know, and whether you want to go negative and advocate against Trump, fine, do it that way, as opposed to advocating for Hillary. I get that, but especially people with a platform, you know. But everybody's got a platform because everybody's got a neighbor, and no one is as influential as your friends. You know, I mean, you know, for as much as you want to listen to Rachel Maddow or Bill O'Reilly, and I hate using them because they're not they're not polar opposites, right?
Yes.
One is
yes. Yes.
right.
Okay. Their goals are slightly different.
Yeah, right. One is interested in truth, and one is on Fox. But nobody, as influential as those people might be, or as any pundit might be, no one is as influential as your friend Larry, who says, "Man, I've been reading this, and Trump's dangerous on global warming." And then you talk and you have breakfast together, and then you've convinced somebody to be like, "Nah, you know what? I was going to vote for Gary Johnson, but we can't have Trump. I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and they live in Ohio, and it makes a difference." So,
Or if you were going to vote for Trump, vote for Johnson.
and yeah, right. I mean, that's better. That's step
better.
one. Step two would be going the other way and realizing, because again, I love that Gary Johnson may take votes away from Donald Trump, although right now the evidence is pretty clear that it's about even for Gary Johnson, probably, in who he's taking votes from.
Yeah, I've seen different things.
But I mean, they're conflicting at best. Best case scenario is conflicting. Worst case scenario is that Clinton is doing worse in four-way races.
And Gary Johnson is by far the second most popular amongst young voters. Certainly.
That's right.
We talked about that in the show yesterday.
So I just think it's critical, and it doesn't, and if I change my mind on this after Hillary Clinton is elected, then I'm a bad kind of hypocrite. I like hypocrites in general. They're the most interesting people are hypocrites. People who aren't hypocritical at all, I got no interest in having a meal with you. But if Hillary Clinton doesn't if she is not sufficiently progressive, and obviously everyone will have a different standard of that, but if this was all nonsense, and if her opposition to the TPP, which I don't oppose the way some others do, but her opposition to, if she backs off of $15 and she backs off of her plan to provide debt relief for college, and if she's not serious about restoring voting rights in areas that the president can make a difference and restricting the nonviolent prison population, all these things, if she backs off on these, then go get her. Then go get her, even if that means losing in 2020.
Well, I have a feeling that's what we'll do.
Right, but I mean,
We've done a little bit of that with Obama.
But I mean, I'm not gonna. Right, but I mean, I don't mean go get. I mean, literally go get her. Like fund and support. And I use him as an example all the time, even though he's a Hillary supporter now. But fund Rush Feingold for his 2020 run for president, and primary her and beat her and have a different nominee for president, and risk losing to that Republican who I trust won't be as dangerous and divisive and awful as Donald Trump. But we don't know. Maybe.
Well, we don't know. Yeah, and look, the shitty situation that we find ourselves in is if climate change is the most important issue to you, which it is to many people, I think that it probably should be. If Hillary Clinton did nothing new to forestall the effects of our warming climate and all of that, it would still be far better than Trump, because Trump says he is going to eliminate all of the environmental protections that Obama has put into effect as president. And so that's a shitty situation, but also not that complicated of one to figure out which the better is of the two. But anyway, let's talk about some of the effects. If the climate continues to heat the way that it is, especially the oceans, which, as I said, we don't focus on nearly enough, a number of different effects are going to take place. Let's talk about some of those. Entire species populations, such as plankton, jellyfish, turtles, and seabirds, are moving toward the poles by up to 10 degrees latitude, which on a global scale is a long way, taking up residence in waters previously too cold to support them. That's 5 times faster than land animals are migrating north. And that does not simply mean that fishing boats then need to travel north or south a little bit more. That could irreparably harm our ability to get fish out of the ocean, feed our population, and all of that. In Southeast Asia, as fish leave their homes, marine fisheries may fall by up to 30% by 2050. And the latest models predict that by 2050, warmer oceans will bleach nearly all of the world's reefs, which is rough, and we've seen a lot of evidence of that over the past couple of decades. If you're not concerned with the reefs, though, and you're not concerned with the animals, I understand. We're a very human-centric species. Most species are. But it also will affect us. People who live near or interact with the ocean could also be at increased risk of illness, as warmer oceans quickly spread pathogens such as cholera-carrying bacteria and algal blooms that can cause neurological diseases. We'll see more of that as the ocean gets hotter. And as the ocean warms, so will severe weather, such as hurricanes and typhoons. And so the leader of that organization that we talked about in the previous video noted the rare double hurricanes that recently skirted Hawaii. And we're seeing sorts of extreme weather, not just in how often it is, but types of extreme weather that we have never seen before on record.
I don't know. I don't know enough about this, but I know that makes me like the overwhelming majority of Americans. Mm-hmm. And so I think were I to advise climate change advocates, people who think we need to do something, and that there needs to be like, we need to be scared. That's what works. That's how Republicans have been elected to office. So we can't just say 1 to 4 degrees Celsius by 2100. We can't just say that 50% of the reefs will be destroyed. Like, it needs to be tangible. And
Reefer madness isn't enough?
You know, and we had, Josh Fox was here, right? You know, and he's incredibly smart and a gifted filmmaker, but he was really hesitant to talk about that stuff. And I think it's a mistake, because I kept saying—
The human consequences?
Yeah, like hunger. Hungry, children dying. Like, if you want to make a difference, then you have to go extreme. Maybe you'll push it a little too far. I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, models are different, but we know that reasonable models have pretty extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
So I think we need more of that, because what really motivates Americans, what motivates the world, but certainly I know most about what motivates us, is fear. It's what's going to have, even if he gets crushed, it's what's going to have 45 million people voting for Donald Trump. And that's something to remember. Like, no matter how hideous he is, even if she buries him, electoral landslide, she wins by 12 points, he's going to have 45 million Americans go to the polls and vote for him. So,
who unfortunately will not leave after that.
That's right. They're going to
still be there, and they'll be watching Trump TV.
They'll be there Wednesday morning.